climate finance generally is considered to be finance that is coming for two kinds of work. One is the traditional mitigation or conventional mitigation, that is reducing the greenhouse gas emission causes and replacing that by cleaner sources, which is non-carbon, non-emission sources. The second kind of climate finance is for basically adaptation and resilience building. Adaptation is getting people prepared, communities, societies, countries prepared for reducing their losses, bearing with climate change, and living with that more, with less harm. So these are the two kinds of things that are financed, and this is considered climate finance. The climate finance discussion started long back, but in 2009 Copenhagen Climate Summit, the agreement was more or less reached that the rich countries which have created this problem basically over the last 200 plus years of excessive extraction of fossil fuels, burning and emission, and not along with that lot of other extraction which also has a fossil fuel footprint, carbon footprint. So they are more responsible. So agreement was that from 2020 onwards, though it was 2009 is to 15th climate COP, but the agreement was from 2020 onwards, the rich countries will provide poor countries around $100 billion per year. Even at that point of time, it was considered inadequate, but every country agreed on that. The reality today is, I'll come quickly to recent times, the OECD countries, which are the rich countries, their own estimates show that from around 2018 or so, they are providing around $79 to $80 billion per year. Unfortunately, most of these, if we look at what is this climate finance that is supposedly going to poorer countries, I'll also mention what kind of countries are the major recipient. If you look at this, you'll see that large part of this are not really grants. Actually, more than 60% are loans. So how can loans being provided to poorer countries by rich countries be considered climate finance? That is one question. Though one civil society report done by Oxfam, which calculated this climate finance figures in respect of whether this is a grant, number one. If it is a grant, then it is considered a climate finance. And if it is a loan at much below market rates, then it is considered a climate finance. So with those two criteria, Oxfam has analyzed that actual climate finance that has gone into all the poor countries of the world for all kinds of climate action is around $19 to $22 billion per year. And for comparison, our own Prime Minister's fancy project of bullet train has a budget tag, a price tag of around $17 billion. So you can understand what kind of climate action is possible with $19 to $22 billion of climate finance from all the rich countries to all the poor countries. So that's one. But out of even that, if you look at the figures provided by OECD countries themselves, it's also shown that they have been from 2009 onward, and 2010, all of us know the Green Climate Fund was set up, which was supposed to be the primary vehicle for climate finance with the task of providing $100 billion per year to poorer countries. So the financing that has come, as per the OECD countries' estimates themselves, a fairly good part, 20% or so, has come from private funds, private financing. And private financing is more or less at market rates, not in concessional rate. So that is one part. But this dialogue and narrative also kept changing by the developed countries. They started by saying climate finance will be basically in 2009-10, basically it will be public funding, and mostly it will be grant and much below market rate lending, which was later on. But after that, the narrative changed, and it was said that it will be co-financing, leveraged financing, bringing in private financing. It will also be private financing. So all these are now considered by the rich countries as also climate finance, which obviously is a fraud. But if we look at what kind of, even those private finance which was expected to come in, actually, if you look at the figures, after 2014, when there was quite a big jump in percentage terms into the percentage of private financing into the total climate financing, Actually, from 2015 onwards, private financing as a percentage of total has come down. So obvious, private companies, private financiers are not going to put money into instruments or projects or policies where there is no immediate return. So they are putting money in renewable energy projects, solar and wind energy projects, where a very clear return on investment is visible or guaranteed, almost guaranteed. So that's one. If we look at what kind of climate finance has actually gone into the countries and who has got it, if you look at that, over 60% again, the original understanding was that both mitigation, that is reduction of emissions, that is the primary target. The second primary target, as I said, is adaptation. They will get equal importance. But instead of that, overwhelmingly private finance has gone, and also the climate finance from the public financing part has gone to mitigation projects. Again, mostly into the renewable energy projects, but some into non-carbon based transportation. So those are the kind of projects which have got maximum amount of money, which most of these projects, I must mention, these are commercially viable projects. Even without climate finance, many of these projects, not all, but many of these projects will be a commercial project. So that is because there is a guaranteed chance of guaranteed return. The other reason very clearly is that it's very difficult to show the result in an adaptation project. You might put money into a community's adaptation. I'll come to that project in India because that's important. India has received 4 GCF financing. 4 different projects in India have been financed by Green Climate Fund. I'll come to that. But it's very difficult to identify and show the net result, the outcome, that, okay, this community is now fully adapted. It's very, very difficult. Whereas for a mitigation project, you can show this much of electricity capacity has been built up. So this much is emission reduction achieved. You can wash your hands by saying that. Of course, these are not so simple as we have seen in the earlier CDM projects. But again, this is completely simpler to show as a project document. So another factor that I want to highlight is who are the countries that have got the maximum amount of money. The understanding was, see, developing countries is a big group, but understanding was the poorest countries, the LDCs, the island countries, those will be getting the maximum amount of climate finance. What has actually happened is that middle income countries like India, Indonesia, and others, they have received the maximum amount of climate finance, whatever has come. However you define climate finance, it is OECD definition or it is civil society definition. The lion's share has gone to the middle income countries. In fact, India, some of the analysis is showing India is the largest recipient of the major climate finance that has actually flown. India is the largest recipient. Of course, if we look into the projects themselves and what has happened on the ground, it will be a different story. But in the broad sense, in the macro sense, India is the biggest recipient of climate finance. So who has given this money and who should have given? That will be another point, another important point, because the global warming and resultant climate change that is happening is not happening because only of current emissions, but about of accumulated emission in the atmosphere. That is the percentage of carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And that also comes from the historical responsibility of countries. In that, the US has contributed 25% of the historical emission. The EU has contributed 22%. China now has gone up to 13%. Japan is close to China in that. Though the population-wise breakdown, per capita breakdown will be very, very different. India is way, way, way down. But as a country, US should be responsible. If you just consider their contribution to the greenhouse gases, accumulated greenhouse gases, US should be responsible for 25%. That's the principle of CBRD, common but differentiated responsibility. But if you take the CBRD and RC, which was an accepted principle in climate negotiations globally, which is common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capacities, then the fair share calculation, because the fair share should be calculated by what is your percentage contribution to the accumulated emission and what is your capacity, what economic capacity you have accumulated by burning that much. So in that analysis, the US share should have come to around 40 to 45% of the total climate finance. But in reality, out of the 100 billion committed, US has given on average, everything together, all kinds of, as per US's own estimates, $7.6 billion per year on the average. So it is way, way down from even their own estimates. And if we go back to this $100 billion figure, which was determined in 2009, at that point, it was told in 2000, starting in 2020. But 2020 dollars and 2009 dollars are very, very different. UN's own estimate, in fact, 2019 UNEP brought out a report which estimated that developing countries for adaptation alone, forget about mitigation, forget about all renewable energy, changing your economy from carbon-based to non-carbon, zero carbon or very low carbon economies, all these are separate. Just for adaptation, the developing countries will need a minimum of something like $300 billion per annum by 2030. And that is a conservative estimate. Some other estimates are showing that $1 trillion will be required for adaptation plus basic mitigation. So this 100 billion, which was committed, it itself is a minuscule amount. But even that minuscule amount is not being given. That is the reality. Now, let me quickly come to, I'll not go into other details. There are a lot of other details into climate finance. If we go into how adaptation is lagging far, far behind, as I mentioned. Let me quickly come to what is happening in India, because for many of our communities, this is very important. I think I have not been, sorry, just one second. I have this little coughing and a problem now. So what is happening is, I hope that in the earlier session, some of the speakers might have spoken about some of the mega solar and wind projects which are happening. On some of these are, or most of these are getting climate finance direct or indirect, either direct as an investment or indirect as a carbon credit money. So both these are accruing to the projects which are renewable energy projects. So that is, and what impact they are having on the ground, that some people must have spoken about. I'll talk about a project. I'll request Ashish to project that screen. I'll talk about a project out of 4 projects that Green Climate Fund has funded in India. The Green Climate Fund, which is dedicated as climate fund, unlike the World Bank, unlike the other MDBs, IFIs. And here I must mention the IFIs. They have most of the IFIs earlier in 2015, I think 2015, they declared that by 2018, they're at least, and this is the World Bank's also clear figure, that 2018, their total funding out of total financing, around 28%, not around, minimum of 28% will be for climate benefits. And World Bank claimed in 2019, they have exceeded that figure by providing $20 billion in 2018. Of course, there are analysis which shows that there are a lot of fudging of figures. I'll not go into that, but these actual figures are actually not, many of the IFIs have not caught on to that. But when we come to the Green Climate Fund, that is not going to fund for anything else, but only for climate finance. And GCF, when it was created in 2010, the understanding was roughly equal emphasis will be given on adaptation and mitigation. The 4 projects that India has, and of course, GCF, in spite of all the commitments, GCF till date have not been able to get more than, I think, around $12 billion. So that's a major amount. But the 4 projects that India got, the total amount of funding from Green Climate Fund that has come to India around 318.8, but 314.8. So roughly around $315 million. Out of those 4 projects, 2 are mitigation. One is clearly equity. That means renewable energy equity. One is little better. That is distributed solar, whether business, commercial, residential, distributed solar financing. Third is a pure adaptation project in Odisha, which is for drinking water and micro irrigation. The fourth is a resilience project, which is called co-benefit, or this is cross-cutting. That means it has both mitigation benefit and adaptation benefit. I had been to Andhra Pradesh. I will end by saying this. I had been to Andhra Pradesh recently to support the local struggle against this project's subsidiary activities. This project is being implemented in 3 states, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Odisha. So this is basically building up resilience of coastal communities. But in the name of building coastal communities resilience, most of the coastal communities has not been really consulted. See, this project in Andhra Pradesh, which is in East Godavari district, it's in the 3rd largest mangrove area in India, that is the Koringa National Park, Koringa Wildlife Reserve. And here, a lot of fish workers, small-scale traditional fish workers do practice their livelihood, because this, as all of us know, mangrove areas are very, very rich fisheries. So the small-scale fish workers have not been consulted as a stakeholder when this project was finalized. This is something like $43 billion. Indian government is providing double the amount, $86 billion. So it's coming to $130 billion. And along with that, the implementing authority, the administrating authority is UNDP. When the community brought the complaint, the Green Climate Fund found its IRM, the Independent Redressal Mechanism, that is their accountability mechanism, they found it ineligible. Why? Because they said this is outside our landscape. This sits, just the complaint that the community brought of a large-scale mangrove deforestation by AP government sits 550 meters away from the boundary of the Koringa Wildlife Sanctuary. Their project claims that this is Koringa Wildlife Sanctuary and surrounding communities, surrounding areas, but they found it ineligible. Somehow UNDP found it eligible. The funding is from GCF. UNDP is administering the project. So I'll end by saying that many of the apparently very desirable climate financing, like this could have been a very good climate financing project, which is going into coastal areas, which is targeting resilience building of coastal communities, which has flaws, definitely has deficiencies of not consulting, not identifying the right stakeholders, all the right stakeholders. But because all of these we are not able to monitor, many of these are really going ahead with the funding agencies, that is GCA, UNDP, any other agencies, and the government, which is often the implementing agency. In this, out of this, at the national level, it is the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, which is the administering authority, but it's being implemented by different state governments at the state level, AP, Odisha, and Maharashtra. So I feel there is a need for strengthening capacities to not only see what is happening, but challenging and possibly correcting. Thank you.